My father didn't clear his throat before doing it. No pause, no hesitation. He just slid the polished folder across the table and said my sister's name like it was a promise. Lena. That was it. 7 days. That's how long she'd been back in the house. 10 years. That's how long I'd carried everything else. The dining room smelled like rosemary and old wood polish, the same way it always had when something important was about to happen. My mother sat beside him, hands folded neatly in her lap, posture perfect. When the folder stopped in front of Lena, she nodded once. That nod was louder than any argument we'd ever had. I didn't ask what was inside. I already knew. Succession papers, vision plans, a future that didn't include the person who had kept the present alive. Lena's smile was careful, practiced, the kind she'd been taught since childhood. She glanced at me briefly, almost apologetic, then back at my parents. The moment wasn't about guilt. It was about placement, about the order of things being restored. I reached into my bag slowly and placed 2 items on the table beside the folder, the power of attorney document and the house keys. The metal hit the wood with a sharp, clean sound, not loud, but final. For a moment, no one spoke. My father frowned slightly, confused. My mother tilted her head as if trying to interpret the gesture. Lena's fingers hovered above the folder, unsure whether to keep smiling. Kara, my father said carefully, "This isn't necessary." I looked at him and realized something with absolute clarity. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about disruption. "It's all here," I said calmly. "Everything you asked me to handle." Everyone thought I was surrendering, letting go, stepping aside. No one noticed the absence of panic in my chest. No one noticed how steady my hands were. Because this wasn't loss, it was release. I grew up in hallways that smelled like antiseptic and lavender. The assisted living facility was my second home, long before I understood what that meant. My father walked those halls like a man on a stage, long strides, easy smiles, greeting every resident by name. People trusted him. He made them feel seen. I followed behind, small hands gripping the handles of a wheelchair I was barely tall enough to push. The metal rattled as it rolled over uneven tile. "Careful, Kara," he'd say, glancing back just long enough to remind me I was there. Then he'd turn away again, toward the people he wanted to impress. Lena never walked behind anyone. She floated, dresses that moved when she did, hair that caught the light, laughter that filled rooms without effort. My mother loved positioning her in doorways, beside holiday decorations, in front of signs that hinted at progress and success. Photos were taken constantly, posted immediately. I appeared in those pictures sometimes, half-cut, out of focus, holding a clipboard, wiping a spill. Even as children, the division felt rehearsed. Lena got the dance shoes, the summer camps, the weekends away to unlock her potential. I got responsibility. Kara's independent, my parents would say, like independence was a personality trait instead of a survival skill. When Lena struggled with homework, they hired tutors. When I brought home straight A's, my father nodded without looking up. "Expected from you." I learned quickly what praise sounded like when it wasn't meant to be given. There's one birthday that never leaves me. Lena's came first. Gold balloons, sparklers, relatives crowding the living room. A cake that took up half the table. My mother hovering nearby, phone in hand, capturing every angle. 2 months later, mine arrived quietly. A grocery store sheet cake sat on the kitchen counter, already leaning. The frosting was too sweet, the edges uneven. My mother kissed my cheek and reminded me to grab my work uniform. "I'll see you after your shift," she said. I was 16. The shift wasn't required. The mortgage was. I didn't resent Lena then. She didn't design the system. She simply benefited from it. Wanting anything for myself felt inconvenient. So I stopped wanting. I learned how to be useful instead. I filled medication drawers, folded towels, helped residents write cards for families who rarely visited. I became the girl who fixed things quietly, the girl whose usefulness erased the need for gratitude. By adulthood, the pattern had hardened. Lena moved to the city to chase a career in creative media. My parents spoke about her future with reverence. When she called home, it was usually for money. They always sent it. Then my father fell ill. Then my mother. Then the business started to strain. Staff left. Regulations tightened. Budgets thinned. And the person they turned to wasn't the daughter they'd invested in. It was me. I signed the power of attorney at 2 a.m. on a vinyl hospital chair, the lights too bright, the air too cold. My mother nodded weakly, as if this were inevitable. "You're good with the serious things," she whispered. It wasn't a compliment, it was confirmation. Some nights, after 14-hour shifts, I'd catch my reflection in the facility's glass doors. Hair pulled back, shoulders squared, tablet tucked under my arm. I didn't look like someone in her 20s. I looked like someone who had already lived a life. That was when I understood it fully. Lena was the face. I was the scaffolding. And scaffolding is meant to be removed once the structure stands. The shift didn't arrive dramatically. It crept in. An email chain about inspections arrived without my name attached. A staffing audit I usually presented was scheduled without me. A succession planning meeting appeared on the calendar only because a nurse mentioned it in passing. I was in the supply room when my phone buzzed. A photo. Lena standing in front of the facility sign, hair lifted by the wind, smiling like she belonged there. The caption read, "Future Leadership." I stared until the screen dimmed. That evening, I walked into the kitchen. My father stood at the counter talking softly to Lena about vision ideas. My mother leaned against the island nodding. They didn't notice me until I was already there. "Kara," my father said absently, "don't worry about the administrative side right now. You've done enough heavy lifting. It's time for Lena to take on bigger responsibilities." My mother touched my wrist lightly. "You're so good behind the scenes," she said. "Let her shine." Behind the scenes. That phrase didn't hurt. It clarified. Later, I found the folder on the table. Financial projections in Lena's handwriting. Numbers wrong. Assumptions impossible. My parents' initials sat neatly in the corner. They had already decided. I closed the folder, placed it back exactly where it was, and went upstairs. That night, I opened a blank document. No anger, no accusations, just truth. A timeline. 10 years of crises I'd absorbed. Then structure, licenses, protocols, partnerships. The system didn't belong to the building. It belonged to the work. And for the first time, I understood something that changed everything. I didn't need permission to stop holding the weight. I just needed to step aside. The fallout didn't arrive like a storm. It came like humidity. Slow, heavy, invisible until everything started sticking. The morning after the legacy celebration, the facility didn't collapse. There were no sirens, no panicked calls, no immediate disaster. That was the cruelest part. My parents had always believed consequences were loud. They weren't prepared for quiet systems continuing without them. I arrived early, before most staff. The halls smelled the same disinfectant and brewed coffee, the familiar hum of oxygen machines, threading through the silence. Routine doesn't ask who owns it. It only asks who maintains it. At the nurse's station, Marie looked up from her tablet and smiled in relief. "Good morning, Kara. I wasn't sure who'd be in today. I'm here," I said. And for the first time, it didn't mean I was holding everything together alone. It meant I was overseeing something stable. The foundation had already begun to work. By mid-morning, emails started routing differently. Vendors addressed Harbor Bridge, not my parents. Inspectors copied Ms. Rowan's office instead of calling my father directly. The staff schedule auto-adjusted after a certification update I'd filed months ago, but never activated. I watched it all unfold the way you watch a bridge hold weight for the first time. Quiet confidence. No applause. In contrast, my parents' world was unraveling in slow motion. I didn't hear it from them. I heard it from absence. No daily check-in texts. No sudden requests. No late night, just one more thing. At first, my body stayed braced for interruption. I'd reach for my phone, then remember, there was nothing left to fix. The first call came 3 days later. Not from my parents, but from a regional administrator I'd worked with for years. "Kara," he said carefully, "your mother tried to schedule a compliance meeting under Lena's name. We couldn't approve it." I closed my eyes briefly. Because? Because she doesn't have clearance, or certification, or operational authority. Of course she didn't. I thanked him and ended the call. My hands didn't shake. They used to. That afternoon, I saw Lena for the first time since the celebration. She stood in the corridor near the rehab wing, holding a clipboard upside down, her phone buzzing repeatedly in her pocket. She looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, emotionally, like someone wearing a costume without understanding the role. She didn't see me at first. When she did, her expression flickered through confusion, resentment, something close to fear. "They're calling me non-stop," she said finally. Not accusation, just exhaustion. "They're adjusting," I replied. Her lips tightened. "They say you set us up." I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I'd learned long ago that explanation was wasted on people who benefited from misunderstanding. "You knew," she said quietly. "Didn't you, when you handed me the keys?" "Yes." "Then why didn't you stop it?" I studied her for a moment. "The question wasn't really about me." "Because you never asked what it took to keep things running," I said. "You only wanted the moment at the table." She looked away. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then she said, "They're saying you humiliated them on purpose." And that sympathy vanished. "I protected the system," I said evenly. "They gambled with it." That was the difference between us. I had learned to build things that lasted. They had learned to assume things would hold. The next week brought letters, banks, auditors, licensing boards. None addressed to me. My parents had believed authority lived in proximity, in being seen, in hosting dinners and shaking hands. They never understood how much of their influence had already migrated, quietly, into documents they'd signed without reading, processes they'd outsourced to me because it was easier. The first resignation came 2 weeks later. Not a staff member, a board advisor, then another. People don't stay loyal to names, they stay loyal to competence. At home, my life felt unnervingly calm. I cooked dinners without interruption. I slept through the night. I stopped flinching when my phone buzzed. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was earned. One evening, as I filed paperwork at my desk, a message arrived from Ms. Rowan. "They're contesting the transfers. Emotionally, not legally. They don't have standing." I nodded to myself. That night, I dreamed of hallways without echoes. A month passed, then another. I ran into my father unexpectedly at a pharmacy. He looked older, not sick, unmoored. He didn't see me at first. When he did, he hesitated, as if unsure which version of me he was allowed to address. "You always were thorough," he said finally. It wasn't an apology. It was the closest thing he had. I nodded once. "I hope the residents are okay," he added. "They are," I said. He waited, for reassurance, for absolution. I gave him neither. When I left, my chest felt light. That was the moment I understood something final. I hadn't taken anything from them. I had simply stopped holding it up. And without me beneath it, the illusion they'd lived inside collapsed under its own weight. By the time the calls stopped completely, I knew something irreversible had settled into place. Silence doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in through the cracks people leave behind. At first, I thought my parents were regrouping, drafting another strategy, preparing another attempt to reassert control disguised as concern. That was their pattern: pressure first, guilt second, panic last. But weeks passed, then months, and nothing came. No late-night voicemails asking for help, just this once. No text pretending nothing had happened. No carefully worded messages testing whether I was still reachable. They had finally reached the edge of what they could extract. And for the first time in my adult life, my nervous system noticed the difference. I stopped waking up braced for emergencies that weren't mine. I stopped rehearsing conversations in the shower. I stopped feeling like every moment of peace was borrowed against an inevitable crisis. My shoulders dropped without me realizing they had been raised for years. At Harbor Bridge, the work didn't slow, it deepened. Without my parents' constant interference, systems stabilized in ways I'd always known they could. Staff turnover declined. Incident reports dropped. Inspections passed cleanly without frantic last-minute scrambling. The foundation operated like it had been waiting for this exact configuration all along. People noticed, not with applause, with trust. Case managers started asking for my input directly. Partner hospitals routed new programs through Harbor Bridge, instead of legacy channels tied to my parents' name. The system had quietly chosen competence over lineage, and no one asked me how it felt, which strangely was the greatest relief of all. Lena lasted 3 months. That's how long she managed before reality peeled back the polish she'd been raised to rely on. I heard about it indirectly through an administrator who spoke carefully, like someone stepping around glass. "She's struggling," he said, not maliciously, just unprepared. I didn't respond, not because I was cruel, but because I understood something she didn't yet. Preparation isn't something you acquire by proximity. It's something you earn by staying when others leave. Eventually, she left too. She didn't announce it. She didn't come to me. She simply stopped showing up. The facilities continued without her. That, more than anything else, was the truth my parents couldn't survive. They had built a family hierarchy on the belief that visibility equaled value, that the people at the front of the room mattered more than the ones holding the structure upright. When that belief collapsed, there was nothing underneath to replace it. I didn't celebrate their fall. I didn't need to. Because my life didn't expand dramatically after they lost control. It became narrower, cleaner, more precise. I moved into a smaller apartment closer to the river. I donated half my wardrobe. I stopped attending events where I was expected to perform gratitude for things I had earned alone. I started saying no without explanation. The people who stayed didn't require one. One afternoon, as I reviewed quarterly reports, I realized something that made me pause. The numbers weren't just stable, they were improving in ways that reflected care rather than expansion. Residents stayed longer. Families reported higher satisfaction. Staff training hours increased, not because of pressure, but because people wanted to be better at what they did. This was what sustainability looked like. Not growth for the sake of recognition, not legacy for the sake of ego, but systems that held because they were built honestly. I thought of my parents then, not with anger, with clarity. They had mistaken control for care. They had mistaken visibility for leadership. They had mistaken my silence for consent. I hadn't taken anything from them. I had simply stopped translating their chaos into stability. The last message came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. An email, short, formal, unsteady beneath the surface. My mother wrote that she hoped I was well, that the past months had been difficult, that she didn't understand how things had gone so wrong. She asked if we could start fresh. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed the message. Not deleted, not replied to, just closed. Because fresh starts don't begin where harm is minimized. They begin where accountability exists. And mine no longer required their participation. That evening, I walked along the river as dusk settled into the water like a held breath. Lights flickered on across the opposite bank. People passed me laughing, arguing, living lives that had nothing to do with my history. For the first time, that felt right. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was simply unentangled. The kind of freedom that doesn't announce itself. The kind that doesn't require witnesses. The kind that lasts because it isn't built on proving anything. Some families fracture loudly. Others dissolve quietly, the way pressure leaves a sealed room once someone finally opens a door. Mine did both. And when it was over, what remained wasn't loss. It was space. Space to choose what I carried. Space to decide who entered. Space to stop being the foundation for people who never asked how much weight I could hold. That was the inheritance I kept. And unlike the one they tried to give away, no one else could take it from me.